When I first read about this case, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was different from anything else I'd ever come across. You know how some stories just stick with you? Like they crawl under your skin. And even when you move on to other things, there's still this whisper in the back of your mind saying, "Don't forget about me." That's what this case was. It was about two ordinary teenage girls, sisters, who vanished one autumn morning while walking to school. At first glance, it sounds like countless other stories you probably heard. Kids disappearing on their way to class, families left shattered, small towns holding candlelight vigils. But what made this one stand out, what made it unforgettable, was what was found 4 years later. And not in some hidden cave, not deep in the woods, not in a car at the bottom of a lake. No, what was found was buried under the playground slide at the very school they were walking toward that morning. And from that moment on, the story stopped being just another missing persons case. It became something darker, something that made even seasoned investigators admit, off the record, that it kept them up at night. The sisters were named Claire and Ava Whitmore. Claire was 15, the older one, protective, the type who always made sure Ava's backpack was zipped, who scolded her as she lagged behind. Ava was 12, bright, playful, known for the way she doodled on everything, from her notebooks to her shoelaces. They lived in a small town called Merrow Creek, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A town where parents still felt comfortable letting their kids walk to school together, believing nothing bad could possibly happen. But something did happen. On the morning of October 17th, 2006, the sisters set off on a familiar route. It was just a 15-minute walk through quiet suburban streets, past rows of modest houses with neatly trimmed hedges, past a little corner store where Ava sometimes begged for candy, past the old stone church with the broken bell tower. Neighbors saw them. A woman watering her flowers said they waved at her. A man jogging said he passed them at the corner of Pine and Willow, and then they were gone. When the girls didn't show up at school, their teachers assumed they were sick. When they didn't come home, their mother panicked. By nightfall, the entire town was out searching, flashlights cutting through the autumn mist, calling their names into the darkness. The woods behind the school were combed. The creek was dragged. Abandoned barns, sheds, even attics were opened. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a backpack, not a scrap of clothing. It was as if Claire and Ava had simply vanished into thin air. At first, police believed it had to be a runaway situation. Maybe Claire had convinced Ava to leave with her. But nothing about their lives suggested that. Their home wasn't perfect. Their parents had separated a year earlier, their father living in another town, but there was no sign of abuse, no sign of planning. Both girls had left their rooms neat, homework half finished on their desks. Ava had even set out her soccer uniform for practice later that day. If they'd run away, they'd done it without money, without supplies, and without telling a soul. But if they hadn't run away, then someone had taken them. That possibility sent waves of fear through Merrow Creek. Parents stopped letting their kids walk alone. Neighbors looked at each other differently, suspiciously, because if someone had abducted the Whitmore sisters, odds were it had been someone they knew. Weeks turned into months. Tips trickled in. Someone claimed to have seen two girls matching their description at a rest stop off the interstate. Another person swore they'd spotted them in a Walmart parking lot 2 towns over. Each lead fizzled out, and eventually the case went cold. But that wasn't the end, because 4 years later, almost to the day, workers renovating the old elementary school playground made a discovery that would reopen every wound, every fear, and every unanswered question. They were tearing down the rusted equipment, making way for something new. And when one of the workers dug under the foundation of the big metal slide, his shovel struck something solid. At first, he thought it was just a piece of buried wood, but as the dirt fell away, he realized it was a box, a small, weathered wooden chest, padlocked shut, as if someone had gone out of their way to keep it hidden. They pried it open, and inside was a nightmare. There were photographs, grainy, taken in dim light. Some of them showed the Whitmore sisters, bound and terrified. Others were too disturbing to describe in detail, but they made it clear what the girls had endured. Alongside the photographs were scraps of clothing, a torn piece of Ava's soccer jersey, strands of hair tied with a ribbon Claire was known to wear. And there was one more thing, a note. It was scrawled in messy handwriting, almost childlike, and it said, "They never left. They've been here the whole time." The workers dropped everything and called the police. Within hours, the playground was crawling with investigators. Crime scene tape fluttering in the autumn breeze. The entire town gathered outside the perimeter, watching horrified as officers carried out evidence bags. Parents clutched their children tightly, whispering prayers. But the most chilling part? The box had been buried directly beneath the slide. The same slide where countless children had played over the years, laughing, shouting, completely unaware that something unspeakable was buried just beneath their feet. When I first read that detail, I felt my stomach twist, because it meant whoever had taken Claire and Ava hadn't just hidden what they'd done. They'd mocked the community. They'd placed their secret in the very heart of innocence, in a playground under a slide where joy and childhood thrived. It was like they wanted it to be found, but only on their terms. Now, let's pause here for just a moment, because this is where I want to remind you, if you're still watching this deep into the story, it means you're just as haunted by it as I was. And I want to invite you to stick with me, because the deeper this goes, the darker it gets. Also, if you find yourself drawn to mysteries like this, stories that dig under your skin and refuse to let go, make sure you're subscribed. It helps me keep telling these stories, and trust me, what's coming next, you don't want to miss. Back to Merrow Creek. The discovery of the box turned the town upside down. Overnight, what had been a cold case was now active again. But the questions it raised were almost more terrifying than the ones it answered. How had the box gotten there? Who had buried it? And the most disturbing possibility of all, did that mean Claire and Ava had been kept somewhere in town for years while everyone was searching miles away? Police immediately zeroed in on the school staff. Teachers, janitors, maintenance workers, anyone who had regular access to grounds. But background checks revealed nothing. No criminal history, no obvious suspects. Then they looked at the construction crew from back when the playground was first built. Again, nothing. But someone had buried that box. Someone who had access, and someone who wanted to taunt the town. There was also the question of timing. Why had it surfaced 4 years later? Why not sooner? Why not never? Some theorized that the killer, or whoever was responsible, had deliberately chosen that time, that maybe the box was a way of marking an anniversary. Others believed the box was just a piece of a larger game, that there were more clues hidden around town, waiting to be uncovered. And then, as if confirmed that chilling theory, another box was found. This time, it wasn't under a playground. It was inside the walls of the old church. Hidden in a crawl space behind the altar, inside were more photographs, more scraps of the girls' clothing, and another note: you pray for them. I play with them. At that point, the case stopped being just a tragedy. It became a legend, a story whispered in Merrow Creek that blurred the line between fact and nightmare. Parents told their kids not to wander near the schoolyard at night. Teenagers dared each other to sneak on the grounds, swearing they'd seen figures moving near the slide after dark. And the police? They were left chasing shadows. When I first heard about that second box, the one hidden in the old church, I felt something inside me shift. It was no longer just a crime. It was ritualistic, calculated, and there was something almost gleeful about it, as if the person responsible was treating the suffering of these two young girls like art or performance. The crawl space where the box had been tucked away was an easy place to reach. You had to know the building. You had to know where to look, which made investigators wonder, had the culprit been part of the congregation, a volunteer, a priest? The church itself had been in decline for years. Its broken bell tower was practically a local landmark, leaning just slightly to the right like it was bowing to time. Fewer and fewer people attended Sunday services, but still, dozens passed through its doors every week, and none of them, not one, had noticed that someone had been crawling behind the altar, leaving behind evidence of unspeakable crimes. When police dusted the box for prints, they found nothing. Whoever had handled it had worn gloves. DNA testing on the scraps of clothing came back inconclusive, too degraded to be of much use. But the note was different. You pray for them. I play with them. That sentence, written in the same messy, childlike scrawl as the first, was enough to make the strongest detective shiver, because it suggested the girls had been alive, at least for some time after they vanished. And that was a thought no one in Merrill Creek wanted to entertain. It split the town. Half of the people believed the sisters had been killed the very day they vanished, and that the boxes were just elaborate hoaxes staged to taunt the living. The other half believed something far worse, that Claire and Ava had been alive, hidden somewhere, suffering for years while everyone searched the wrong places. I remember sitting with that thought, staring at my screen, imagining them in some locked basement, hearing the church bells on Sunday mornings, knowing they were just a short distance from home but completely powerless. That possibility kept me awake for nights. And it wasn't just me. Parents across town began reporting that their children were having nightmares. Dreams about being trapped on the slide, about voices whispering from the church walls. It was as if the town itself had absorbed the trauma and was bleeding it back out through its children. The police tried to keep order, but fear has a way of spreading faster than facts. Soon, Merrill Creek wasn't just a town with tragedy. It was a haunted town. Now, what I found chilling, and this detail doesn't always make it into the official retellings, was that shortly after the second box was discovered, a third one appeared. Not buried, not hidden, just placed. It was found on the steps of the police station one early morning. A small, dented metal lunchbox, painted with faded cartoon characters. Inside was only one item, a key, and another note. The door has always been open. That was when police realized they weren't dealing with someone who wanted to remain hidden. No, they were dealing with someone who wanted to be seen. That changed the investigation completely. They combed through old records, hunting for anyone who had ties to both the school and the church. They interviewed janitors, substitute teachers, even volunteers from years back. But every lead ended the same way, in nothing. Meanwhile, the community was suffocating under paranoia. Parents refused to let their kids go anywhere alone. Teenagers swapped theories in hushed voices, daring each other to sneak into the church at night. Some swearing they saw lights flickering inside when it was supposed to be empty. One story that made the rounds was that if you stood under the playground slide at midnight, you could hear the sound of two girls laughing. Not crying, laughing. High-pitched, eerie giggles echoing out of the dirt. Of course, most people dismissed that as kids scaring each other. But in a town like Merrill Creek, where boxes of horror were surfacing in the most innocent places, even the wildest stories carried a weight they wouldn't elsewhere. And then came the break everyone thought would finally solve it. A man named Gregory Holt. He was a drifter, arrested in a neighboring county for trespassing. When his fingerprints were run, they matched a partial print found on one of the old photographs in the first box. The police thought they had him. They interrogated him for hours, dragging every detail of his past into the light. Holt had a history of odd jobs, including a short stint working maintenance at the Merrill Creek Elementary School, right around the time the Whitmore sisters vanished. It seemed too perfect to be coincidence, but Holt denied everything. And when they searched his belongings, his car, his old storage locker, they found nothing to connect him directly to Claire and Ava. Just one thing stood out. In his wallet, tucked behind a stack of receipts, was a slip of paper. On it was scrawled a sentence in messy, childlike handwriting. They never left. The exact same phrase from the first note. Now, was this a smoking gun? Or was Holt simply a deranged man who had latched onto a town's tragedy for attention? Police couldn't prove it either way. With no physical evidence tying him to the sisters, he was eventually released. And that was worse than an arrest, because it meant the monster behind the notes might still be out there. At this point in the story, I need to pause again. Not because I want to, but because I think you need to breathe. Stories like this, they're heavy. They drag you into a darkness that's hard to shake. And if you're still with me now, I know you feel it too. That unease creeping in as you listen. If you're brave enough to keep following me into this darkness, hit the like button. It tells me I'm not alone in staring into cases like this. Cases that feel more like horror stories in reality. All right, Let's keep going. Merrill Creek was drowning in theories at this point. Some believed Holt was guilty. Others thought he was just a distraction. But the whispers that scared me the most were the ones that pointed not to an outsider, but to someone who still lived there. Someone hiding in plain sight. Because the boxes weren't just evidence. They were performances, carefully staged, timed, and each one seemed designed not only to torment the families, but to remind the whole town that they'd failed to protect their children. And then, after months of silence, another discovery was made. This time, not by construction workers or churchgoers or police, but by children. Two boys playing near the edge of the woods stumbled on a shallow hole, partially covered by leaves. Inside was another box, this one plastic, weather-beaten, and inside were Polaroid photos. The images showed something none of the others had. They showed the inside of a basement, crumbling stone walls, a dirt floor, a single naked light bulb hanging from a ceiling, and in one corner, a school desk. On that desk, carved deep into the wood, were two names. Claire, Ava. The sisters had been there. Whoever took them had kept them in that basement, long enough for them to carve their names into the furniture. But whose basement was it? And that's where investigators turned next, hunting for basements in Merrill Creek that matched the photos. When I first looked at those Polaroids, I felt sick. There's something different about old photographs, especially Polaroids. They don't feel like evidence. They feel like memories. Someone had stood in that basement, lined up the shot, and captured the place where two little girls once lived out their nightmare. The carved names were the worst part. Claire, Ava. They weren't just scribbles. You could see the desperation the way the letters were gouged into the wood, like they pressed so hard their fingers might have bled. Police immediately began cross-referencing the photos with homes in Merrill Creek. They went door to door, looking at basements, photographing walls, comparing cracks and stains. Hundreds of basements were inspected, and every single one was a dead end until they got to the Harper property. Now, here's where things get disturbing. The Harpers were a completely normal family, longtime residents, no criminal records. Their youngest son even played Little League with Claire before she disappeared. But when police entered their basement, something immediately stood out. The walls, the same stone pattern from the photos, the same dangling light bulb, the same crack that ran diagonally from the window down toward the dirt floor. It was almost a perfect match. But here's the thing. The desk wasn't there. Neither were any carvings. The Harpers swore they'd never seen a desk in their basement. They swore they had nothing to do with the girls. And when the walls were tested for DNA, nothing matched. It was as if someone had staged the photos inside their basement, then removed everything before police could find it. Think about that. Someone had been inside an ordinary family's home, taking pictures without them knowing. And just like that, the case was turned inside out. Because if the Harpers were telling the truth, and there was no hard evidence to suggest otherwise, then it meant the culprit not only kidnapped the Whitmore sisters, but had the audacity to creep into other people's homes to taunt the police. Who does that? And more importantly, who could pull it off without ever being seen? I remember calling up an old detective who had worked the case just to hear his take, and I'll never forget what he told me. He said, "You know what keeps me up at night? It wasn't that we couldn't find him. It was that I started to think maybe he was standing right there with us the whole time, watching." That thought still chills me, because this wasn't just about the girls anymore. This was about control, about power. Whoever did this wanted to own the fear of Merrill Creek. They wanted to shape it, feed it, keep it alive long after the Whitmore sisters vanished. And if you think it stops there, it doesn't. Because a year later, when people thought maybe the case was going cold again, another box appeared. This one wasn't hidden in dirt or tucked into shadows. No, it was left right on the playground slide where Claire and Ava had disappeared years before. Inside was a single item, a baby doll, its eyes gouged out, and on its chest, written in that same childlike scrawl, were 4 words. "I never left here. I need you to sit with that for a second," because this was no longer a mystery about what happened. This was a declaration, a reminder that the culprit hadn't disappeared. They were still there, in the same town, still watching, still waiting. Parents broke down. Teachers quit. Families moved away. And yet nothing ever led to an arrest, which is why the case of Claire and Ava Whitmore became one of the darkest unsolved mysteries I've ever come across. But before you think this is the end, no, we're still only halfway down the rabbit hole, because what came after the doll under the slide was worse. You see, I've talked about the police, about the town, about the boxes, but there's one person I haven't told you about yet, the girl's mother, Rebecca Whitmore, and her story may be the most haunting of all. Rebecca was never the same after Claire and Ava disappeared. She stopped working, stopped eating. Her hair went gray in just a few years, but she never stopped searching. Every lead, every rumor, every whisper. She followed them all. Neighbors would see her walking the streets at night with a flashlight, calling out her daughter's names into the dark, long after everyone else had given up. And then one evening, she did something that nobody could explain. She went to the old elementary school, alone, after midnight. She broke in through a side door that no longer locked properly, and she went straight to the janitor's closet. Inside, she found something no one else had ever reported. Scratched into the back of the wooden door, barely visible under layers of paint, were words written in small, shaky handwriting. "We're still here." Rebecca swore it was Claire's handwriting. She swore she recognized the loops in the letters, the way the R curled. Police dismissed it as vandalism. They said some kid probably carved it years later, trying to scare people. But Rebecca knew, and she told anyone who would listen, that her daughters hadn't just disappeared. They were still there, somewhere close. At this point, if you're still listening, I know you feel what I feel, the weight of this case pressing down on you, because it doesn't read like a normal crime. It reads like something darker, something that bends reality, like a horror story told around a fire, except every single piece of it is documented in police records. And if that isn't terrifying, I don't know what is. Rebecca became the ghost of Merrill Creek long before she died. Everywhere you went, there she was. In the library, cross-checking yearbooks. In the woods, pinning scraps of ribbon to trees she swore her daughters had touched. Sitting at town hall meetings, staring to the council members as if they were all part of the cover-up. The rest of the town pitied her, sure, but they were also scared of her, because when she walked into a room, it was like the air went cold. People said her eyes stopped looking at you and instead looked through you, as if she was only half in this world, the other half wandering wherever Claire and Ava had been taken. And then there were the notebooks, piles of them, stacked floor to ceiling in her bedroom, handwriting filling every page. Police reports she had copied down word for word, maps with red strings pulled taut across pushpins, lists of names, neighbors, teachers, delivery drivers, anyone who might have been nearby that morning. But in the margins, between the neat, factual lines, were other things. Scribbles, repeated phrases, sometimes just one word written over and over again until the pen dug through the paper. Basement. Slide. We're still here. She started seeing patterns where no one else did. For example, she insisted that the playground slide where the girls vanished lined up perfectly with the old sewer tunnels that ran under town. She claimed the tunnels were like veins, carrying the town's secrets beneath the surface. Police dismissed her, again, said she was grieving, unstable. But then one night, Rebecca disappeared too. It was October, rain pounding against the rooftops. She left her house unlocked, the front door swinging in the wind, her flashlight lying in the driveway, its beam still flickering against the puddles. No note, no trace. At first, people thought she'd finally broken under the weight of it all, wandered off into the woods and never come back. But weeks later, something surfaced. The kids at Merrill Creek Elementary found it first, tucked into the back corner of the lost and found bin. A notebook, Rebecca's notebook, the final one. Inside, written in her sharp, frantic hand, was a single page that didn't match the rest. It wasn't notes or theories or timelines. It was a message. The girls were here. I saw them. They're waiting under the slide. That was the last anyone ever heard from Rebecca Whitmore. And here's the part that will never leave me. The day after her notebook was found, the playground slide was removed. Not by police, not by the town, but overnight. No one knew who ordered it. No one saw the crew. By morning, it was just gone, as if it had never been there at all. And beneath the dirt where it once stood, the ground had been freshly turned. Now, I've read a lot of cold cases. I've seen the darkest things people can do to each other. But this one is different. Because every path, every theory, every lead, it all circles back to that one spot. The slide, the place where the Whitmore sisters vanished, the place where the doll was found, the place Rebecca swore she saw her daughters, even years after they were gone. And yet, the official record says nothing was ever recovered. No bodies, no clothes, no trace, just dirt, freshly dug dirt. So what do you think happened? Was it the work of a calculated predator who manipulated the entire town like pieces on a board? Was it someone close, a teacher, a parent, a friend, who blended in so well no one ever suspected? Or is there something darker woven into Merrill Creek, something no police report could ever explain? Because when I read Rebecca's final words, I don't just see the scrawl of a grieving mother. I hear them. We're still here. And if you close your eyes for too long in a place like Merrill Creek, maybe you'll hear them too. That, my friends, is the story of Claire and Ava Whitmore, the two sisters who vanished walking to school, and the unspeakable secret buried under the playground slide. And if you stayed with me through all of this, don't forget, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this story. Because the more people who hear it, the harder it is for the shadows of Merrill Creek to swallow a whole. Rebecca didn't just vanish into nothing. At least, I don't believe she did. In the weeks before she disappeared, several neighbors reported seeing her wandering at night, carrying nothing but a lantern and one of her notebooks. She'd pace in circles around the elementary school playground, murmuring under her breath, stopping now and then to press her ear against the ground. One neighbor swore he heard her whispering, I hear them calling." And what chills me even more is this. Some of those neighbors admitted that when they got close enough to listen, they swore they heard something too. A faint knocking, a muffled sound, rising up from beneath the dirt where the slide stood. Of course, police never found anything. They dismissed it all as grief, twisting the minds of desperate people. But imagine it for a second. You're standing on an empty playground, the swing chains rattling in the night breeze, and from beneath your feet, something knocks back. There are theories, of course. Some people believe it was a drifter, a stranger passing through town who grabbed the girls and disappeared before anyone even knew. Others are convinced it was someone local, someone who had grown up in Merrill Creek, who knew the schedules, the shortcuts, the blind spots, someone who could hide in plain sight. One of the more disturbing theories involves a cult, not the hooded robes kind, but something quieter, a handful of townsfolk with strange, secret traditions. I found an old record buried in the town archives that mentioned a children's offering ritual dating back to the 1800s. The settlers who built Merrill Creek believed the land was cursed unless it was fed. The ritual called for objects to be buried under new structures, dolls, toys, trinkets, to appease whatever lingered beneath the soil. But in some of the darker versions, whispers hinted at something more, something living. Now, that could all just be folklore, a scary story to explain why bad things happen. But when you think about the doll left on the slide, the handwriting carved into walls, the freshly turned dirt, it feels less like coincidence and more like a tradition reborn. And yet, there's another theory, one I've never been able to shake. What if the girls never left the playground at all? What if the ground beneath Merrill Creek holds more than just soil and roots? Old maps of the town show an entire network of tunnels and crawl spaces dug out when the sewer lines were first being laid. Most of them were sealed off decades ago. But sealed doesn't mean gone. What if the girls were taken underground? What if they're still there? Here's the part that haunts me the most. Even today, locals say that when you walk past the site where the slide once stood, you can hear the faintest sound. Children laughing. But not the kind of laughter that warms you. The kind that chills you. High-pitched, echoing, just out of reach. like it's coming from below. I went there once. Just once. It was daylight, bright as could be. Kids running around the new equipment they'd built after the old slide vanished. And for a moment, it seemed normal, ordinary. But then I stood still, closed my eyes, and I swear to you, I heard it. Not loud, not clear, but faint. Two voices, laughing, calling. We're still here. That's the thing about Merrow Creek. It isn't just a place where two sisters vanished. It's a place that refuses to let the living forget. Rebecca knew it. The police felt it. And I can tell you, after researching this case for years, after reading the files and staring at those photographs, I feel it too. There's something unfinished in that town. Something waiting beneath the dirt, patient, hungry. And if you ever find yourself in Merrow Creek, standing at the edge of that playground, ask yourself this: do you really want to listen? Because you might hear them. And if you do, they might hear you back. That's the story of Claire and Ava Whitmore, the sisters who vanished walking to school, and a horrifying trail of clues that led to the playground slide. If you stayed with me through this nightmare, thank you. Stories like this need to be told. Because even when the files go cold, the shadows never stop whispering. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, and share it so more people can learn about what really happened in Merrow Creek.